This is a brief video introduction to put into context the videos I will be making in the near future regarding Star Trek, the Star Trek franchise, and various things about Star Trek. I thought after making the introduction video to my forthcoming informal comic book series that I should probably also do a short one regarding Star Trek as well, since I do intend on also making videos regarding my thoughts and feelings regarding various things, episodes, characters, concepts. Before I begin, though, I do have to address the elephant in the room, and that is, if you've looked at any of my videos, two in particular, you will no doubt know that I do not believe in the existence of outer space as it has been sold to us. I don't subscribe to the heliocentric model. I don't believe in things like gravity and planets as we know them. And you might be thinking, well, Darren, if you're a flat earther, how can you be a Star Trek fan? And the answer to that question is rather simple. Star Trek came first in my life before Flat Earth did, and it had a chance to get a hold of me, and it's the most entertaining franchise on television that I've ever seen, and it as you'll see, led to a lot of decisions in my life, big decisions, and we'll go over that here very shortly. But in short, I view outer space as a fantasy environment. I understand that Star Trek, one of the big aspects of the show is that it purports to demonstrate, or it basically tries to show us where we'll be in X number of years. This is supposed to be a show about the future of humanity. I tend not to agree with that, but I still enjoy it nonetheless, because I tend to look at Star Trek mostly as a science fiction naval drama with occasional action, but not always action. I used to look at Star Trek fans as being of two separate kinds, Star Trek hawks and Star Trek hippies. I was a Star Trek hawk. I liked the military aspect of Star Trek. You had captains and commanders and admirals and lieutenants and ensigns and even chiefs at some point. And that's what I looked at. I looked at it as. There are other people, however, who think it's all about, furthering human understanding and, basically just meeting new cultures and also, having various episodes be commentary on today's politics and socio-political topics. And it is that. They're absolutely right. However, the Star Trek that I choose to emphasize is a little bit more on the tactical side. So, something that people are going to pick up on right away whenever I start talking about various things in Star Trek is that I have a naval experience. I served for 4 years on board the USS Trepang. It was a 637 or Sturgeon class nuclear attack submarine, SSN 674. The ship was around from approximately 1966 through 1999. I was part of her decommissioning crew. The last year or so I was on board the boat was all about prepping for that event and then also seeing it through. But I did get 3 years on board with it being a functioning warship for the U.S. Navy. I joined the Navy and submarines specifically because I felt that submarines were the absolute closest thing anybody could get to serving on a ship like ones we see on Star Trek, as ridiculous as that sounds. And I knew, way before I joined that no, it would not be anything like serving on a starship, but it would be the closest thing. And that's one of the reasons why I chose that service. It's I can tell you that it's not exactly like serving on any Enterprise. If anything, it's more like serving on probably a Cardassian ship. There's anybody who's familiar with Star Trek knows that the Cardassians are a military race, and they're all very much about being professional soldiers when they're doing their jobs, and that's what we felt like. We weren't interested in seeking out new life or anything like that. We were interested in doing whatever job they gave us to do, and it usually wasn't that. In fact, it never was that. We were a surveillance platform. We were a tactical escort in some cases. We also did some things with special operations. So, it was a little bit more of a secretive sort of experience than what you might get on a destroyer or a frigate or an aircraft carrier. Trepang was old when I got to it, and to give you an idea of how old it was, there were newer submarines of the Los Angeles class, the 688s, that were being decommissioned before her. And the reason why that was because Trepang, as a 637 or Sturgeon class, I'm going to say 637 from now on. Star Trek fans would call it Sturgeon class, but we like to abbreviate and shorten things in the Navy and in the submarine force, so I'm just going to call it a 37. 37s could do things that the newer boats couldn't do. I can't get too specific, but basically they were better as surveillance platforms when it came to periscope operations. They had the ability to remain steady, much better than the newer ones. They also were able to dive a little bit deeper, and they were also a little bit better suited for working under the ice, the polar ice cap, the North Pole. As I mentioned, I described the ship the way Picard described his first ship he ever commanded, the USS Stargazer. He called it an overworked, underpowered vessel, always on the verge of flying apart at the seams. Trepang wasn't quite that until the last year we were doing stuff. It seemed like every underway we went into, something rather important broke. Including some of the propulsion system components, things like that. It wasn't anything we couldn't make makeshift repairs on underway, but it did feel once in a while like maybe they squeezed a year or two more out of this boat than they should have. All right. A brief introduction, I guess, also is in order for general things you'll hear in various videos that I'll be doing. The first thing is that I do have favorites. I was first introduced to Star Trek when I was very little. I had seen Star Wars back when it first came out, but I was only 4.5 years old when it was out in theaters, and I didn't remember much of it. I couldn't follow the story. I just liked the pretty lights and the music and the explosions and things like that. My brain just wasn't developed enough to really comprehend the story. It wasn't until years later when I saw it on HBO that I finally found out what the story was actually about, with the whole Death Star thing and all that. A year or so later, my dad took me to see Star Trek the Motion Picture, and I was able to follow a story now in a movie theater. The problem was that for a little kid, Star Trek the Motion Picture was so boring, I fell asleep during the film. I don't remember much about it. I remember the transporter accident. I remember not knowing who any of these characters were, but the rest of the audience did. And so it wasn't until years later when Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, came to HBO that I was able to first enjoy a Star Trek film. And I loved that one. So to me, Star Trek II is actually the first Star Trek film, because it's the first one I ever saw and comprehended. And I was pretty much hooked at that point. So I got to know the movies first, and right around the time the fourth film came out, I think it was shortly after, is when Star Trek The Next Generation debuted. And Star Trek The Next Generation was on a particular affiliate in Wisconsin that also showed reruns of the original series right after it. So I got introduced to both TNG and TOS at the same time. I understand TOS's position in the franchise as being the old granddad, the greatest of them all, because it was the first one, the one that kicked off the franchise and got people hooked and such. But I tend to look at TNG and TOS as being more or less equal, simply based on my own experience of having experienced them separately, or at the same time. So, for example, the affiliate that we had was kind of interesting. They would play an episode like when the episode Darmok on TNG aired. They would play Darmok, and then immediately following that, they played Arena, which is a somewhat similar story in that you have the captain of the Enterprise on a planet with an alien captain, except that's where the similarities end. But it was interesting because Darmok was basically the anti-Arena. It was demonstrated that how different the shows were, and so I learned about Star Trek simultaneously from both shows. My favorite Star Trek show of all time, however, was the first spin-off of TNG, Star Trek The Next Generation. Then that spin-off was called Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And the reason why, basically just because it had, what's the word? That show felt more like a real television show. And I know that sounds odd, but I mean, when you look at how you got to know the characters in this space, and the space was always there. It was about a town in space, essentially. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was about a group of people living on a space station. About half were Starfleet, the other half belonged to other organizations or were civilians. And they had episodes that were just downright funny, as if they were written by, the people who wrote Cheers and other shows. So that ended up being my favorite. My least favorite of the ones that I've seen was Star Trek Voyager. And before you all start talking about how what a sexist I am, it wasn't that you had a female captain. It was everything about the show, including the fact that they picked a female captain that didn't feel like a military leader. She felt more like a school teacher on a field trip, an extended, dangerous field trip to me. And I just didn't care for it. They would use technobabble in ways that just didn't make any sense. The ship would miraculously survive some event at the end, and they would casually mention, "Oh, we slipped through a crack in the event horizon." And I'm like, what? The person who wrote that doesn't know what an event horizon is. So I mean, I had a real problem with the writing. I thought that the Doctor character was outstanding. I actually liked the idea of a character on a show that was in fact a character. He wasn't a living thing. He was a computer program that had a pre-designated personality, and I liked that kind of stuff. But pretty much every other character in the show was some kind of, parody isn't the word, but weak homage to another character. For example, Tom Paris was literally Nick Locarno. He was the same actor and everything. A bad boy Starfleet officer who really wasn't all that bad. Janeway was a lot like Captain Rachel Garrett of the Enterprise C from the Enterprise, or the start of the TNG episode, Yesterday's Enterprise. B'Elanna Torres was basically Kalar. Tuvok was a a standard, typical Vulcan. Really didn't bring anything to the table as far as giving us more understanding of what Vulcans are like. And that was about it. Nothing special about Chakotay or Harry Kim. I've actually spoke more about the show that I didn't like the most, more than the show that I did. And that's kind of odd, I suppose. But I'll get back to Deep Space Nine later. There's also another show that I'm going to mention, and that is Enterprise. I don't think Enterprise killed the franchise. I think that Voyager killed the franchise. But I think that Enterprise was on its way to resuscitating the franchise when certain powers that shouldn't have been at the CBS Viacom decided to cancel the show. That being Les Moonves. Enterprise has a special place in my heart because prior to the show being filmed, while it was still in pre-production, the makers of the show actually toured a couple of submarines. And I had been out of the Navy at that point, but a friend of mine who was still in sent me an email going, "Man, you won't believe who was here today, Rick Berman and Brandon Braga." I'm like, "Really? What do they want?" Well, they were taking pictures of the boat, the interior. They wanted to get a look at the sets. They wanted to get a look at our uniforms, what we wore underway and everything. And I'm like, "Really? That's interesting." Yeah, something about the next Star Trek series. I'm like, "Really? Okay." So then I found out later that the series was going to be a prequel. And then when I saw the pilot, I obviously recognized why they were on an attack sub. There was a lot of influence on the internal sets and costumes from the submarine service. The coveralls that they wore, the cotton outfits rather than the lycra outfits, all the bright work on the bridge. It was all very submarine-like. Even the consoles even had handles on them and such. I think that the people who put the handles on didn't really know what they were for. They look more like grab bars that you find in your shower. But so I mean, I appreciate what they tried to do with Enterprise. I know that they made a lot of continuity mistakes, particularly in the first 2 years. And Manny Koto was well on his way to fixing all those and had plans to do so, but unfortunately he was curtailed by the powers that should not have been, and Enterprise ended prematurely, and with probably the most awful series finale any Star Trek's ever gotten. I mean, I disliked that one more than I had disliked Voyager's. Anyway, one more thing I should also discuss, and that is what I consider Star Trek and what I don't consider Star Trek. Everything that comes after Enterprise ended, in my opinion, just doesn't qualify. The JJ films are okay, I suppose, because they are intended to be in an alternate reality. So things like, Vulcan exploding and, the Enterprise being able to fly through planetary atmosphere like Voyager did, that's okay. I mean, I even thought it was kind of cool when Kirk hides his Enterprise. That'd be the Chris Pine Kirk, by the way, hides his Enterprise in an ocean. I thought that was kind of neat. I thought, as long as you're in an alternate reality where the technology is all different, why not show us that this Enterprise can do things that the other one couldn't? I didn't have a problem with that. I actually thought that the Star Trek films in the JJ verse got better as they went along. I absolutely can't stand the 2009 film. I liked the second one, even though it's far from perfect, and I actually thought Beyond was the best of the three. Mostly because we get rid of the Enterprise right away and we get to concentrate on characters, and I also really liked the Franklin on that show, that movie. As far as the material that is being put out by CBS on CBS All Access, the dreaded Star Trek Discovery, or STD as I and others call it, I just don't consider that A, Star Trek, and B, worth my time. They're not even trying to make it connect with the other shows, thematically or visually or tonally. It seems like they're purposefully trying to do things to tick off the fan base. It's as if they think that us pissing and moaning about it is as good as us liking it. attention is attention, right? No. It's got to be good. And, Star Trek used to be very smart entertainment, and it isn't anymore. And it's a Star Trek series for people who don't like Star Trek, and it's a Star Trek series by people who don't know what Star Trek is, as far as I'm concerned. And I won't be commenting on anything happening there because I'm not watching it. I won't even hate watch it. I don't want to give them my time. I don't want to give them my attention. So that's my feelings on that. And so I'm looking forward to doing a couple of videos every once in a while regarding things. Also, I want to mention that I can already tell you right now that a lot of videos that I'll be making are probably going to be reactions to things on the Anti-Trekkers channel. If you haven't seen his channel and you want to see a good homemade geek channel, go ahead and subscribe to that one. If you want to see a incredible channel regarding Starship lore and Star Trek and other franchises, I would recommend Trek Yards. The hosts, there's two geeks from, one's from Britain and the other one is from Canada. And what's really a nice treat about them is that they're able to interview people who were there and were actually part of the production crews of various shows. Guys like Doug Drexler and Rick Sternbach, people who actually designed ships for Star Trek. So they get to talk to them about stuff, and those are always really, really good episodes. I recommend looking at those. And I should probably also give out a shout out to another channel called Lore Reloaded. The reason why is because he was sort of my gateway to the Anti-Trekkers channel. And I don't really watch Lore Reloaded anymore. He kind of pisses me off. I mean, I'm sure he's a great guy and everything, but his antics on his show just annoy me. So I stopped watching him. But he may not annoy you. You might have a really good time with his show, with his channel. So, I mean, go ahead and check him out. If you hate him, I don't blame you. If you do like him, then more power to you. You got more things to watch. So I will sign off now. I will talk to you guys later about things Star Trek from a submariner's perspective, and hopefully you might find that a little bit interesting. Thanks for watching.